we would like to welcome Dr. Rilett and turn it over to you to speak on careers in transportation, sir.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Appreciate that introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. I think everyone can see it. And as Dr. Perkins was indicating, I'm going to talk about transportation careers. Again, we're virtual. Normally it'd be a lot more interactive, but I'm still going to try and ask the scholars some questions as we go through, probably through chat, or I guess we can open up our mics as well. So by way of overview, I'm going to provide a definition of transportation and the system, and really the focus is more on the careers and the challenges. So what would a future career in transportation look like? What kind of problems are we going to be solving in the next 20 to 30 years? So what is transportation? Very simple. Safe movement of person and goods over time and space. The objectives are constant, the methods change. 200 years ago, we'd be talking about canals. 100 years ago, we'd be talking about railways. Now, we're much more likely to talk about airplanes and roadways, as well as railways. So all of those things form the transportation system. So we characterize them by the things being transported. Is it people? Is it freight? The type of vehicle? All these things. I want to briefly talk about the system, because this is what really sets us apart in terms of what a transportation is. It's a component of elements. So if I talked about a civil engineering system, and I'm a civil engineer, so I tend to talk about these types of things, there's usually a couple of things. We arrange some elements to resist a load on a system, and we have to do it economically. So for the engineers in the audience, you should see this is pretty familiar. This is a lot of what your coursework is related, right? We have some load, we have something that we're going to arrange, and we have to do it economically. So a structural system, we have elements, we have beams, we have columns, we have a foundation. We have a load, that's the weight of the building. We have a live load for the things that change over time. We have wind loads, we might have an earthquake load. And we're designing these buildings for 20 to 50 to 100 years without failure. And for structural systems, we're pretty good at it as a profession. We typically don't walk into buildings going, I wonder if this building's going to fall down on me, right? We do a pretty good job of arranging these elements to resist the load and do it economically. How old is civil engineering? Well, Hammurabi lived about 4,000 years ago. He was the ruler of Babylonia. And he is famous for putting down a code of laws, some of which apply to engineering. So here's my first quiz for everyone. So his code was covered lots of things, but one of it was about building. So if a builder builds a house and it doesn't do it correctly, and the house collapses and causes death of the owner, that builder shall be put to blank. So I'll ask the students, I'll look at the chat, I guess, if I can. What do you think the answer is from 4,000 years ago? Anyone? Yeah, I guess we could talk, because I can't really see the chat. Oh, maybe right there. There it is. Death, yes. He's going to be put to death. So pretty hardcore 4,000 years ago. So for all the engineers out there, we don't do that now. You're still held liable. We're professional engineers. But 4,000 years ago, if you built something and collapsed, you're in trouble, right? For the lawyers out there, this is also one of the first sets of laws. If you want to see this document, it's actually etched in stone. If you're ever fortunate enough to go to Paris and the Louvre, it's actually in the Louvre that you can see. So this brings us to modern times. This is John Hillman, who's patented a beam for railways. And you might say it's an interesting picture. What's Mr. Hillman doing? And what it is, it's very similar to the previous picture. This is a tradition in bridge building, particularly in the railways. It's been on for about 150 years. When they first started building bridges for railroads, the engineer would often stand under it the first time that it was used. Okay, so if you think about it, you'd have to be pretty sure of your design if you're going to stand under a bridge the first time it's used by a railway. And this is what it's doing now. Now, is there any danger of collapse? No, he designed it correctly. The engineers designed these, but it's still that same tradition, right? That you're responsible for what you do, and you should be able to have the confidence in it that you would use it. We have all kinds of great bridges out here. It's New York City. That's the Brooklyn Bridge, one of the most famous, iconic bridges in the world. This is the Pont de Gard aqueduct in southern France. It was built 2,000 years ago for water, was then converted to roads. Still standing, still useful. You can go see it today. It's a quite impressive engineering structure. And you can see the same things. We build the elements to withstand a load. In this case, it lasted 2,000 years. Transportation system is slightly different. Our elements are highways, arterial roadways, local streets, traffic signals. The load is the demand for movement, right? So we have vehicles and passenger freight and all of these types of things. It's a little bit different than structural because it's fail-soft. We design it to fail twice a day, right? And if you've ever driven in Dallas or Houston or Chicago at rush hour, you know that it's not a free movement. It's pretty congested. You could say, well, why don't we design it so that there is no fail, it never gets congested, and you could take the classes, but you find out it gets very expensive to build a road for peak periods. So we just make a trade-off on that. Transportation is really expensive part of the U.S. economy. It's probably about 20% of our gross national product is just related to transportation, and it's a key part of our economy. If we don't have a good economy or a good transportation system, we're probably not going to have a good economy. You saw the infrastructure bill, perhaps, that was just announced this week, where they're trying to improve the infrastructure and particularly parts of the transportation system. And this is why. If you have a strong transportation system, you have a strong economy. So that's an introduction to transportation. What's a career? Well, for those of you who are engineers, almost all aspects of engineering is part of transportation: aeronautical, chemical, mechanical, electrical, and civil. All of those are instrumental parts of, there are careers in here that are very productive and very rewarding. But it's also very multidisciplinary, as Dr. Perkins was indicating. If you're in economics, if you're in environmental science, if you're in planning or statistics, psychology and human factors, public administration, law or business, or going into them, that's also involved in transportation. We work a lot with people in our center in these areas. The other nice thing about transportation is it's very people-oriented. You're working directly with people. You're making their lives better. It's not simply engineering. That's why the cognitive psychology and the social sciences all come involved with it, because it impacts people. You have to interact with them when you're designing and operating your system. So it's not just simply engineering. And really what it is identifying problems, these careers, and finding solutions, which we're going to go into next. So what's a transportation problem? So I'm going to ask everyone what they think current transportation problems are. So if you could put it into, the chat, what do you think a transportation problem that you've seen in your careers at the universities? So I'm seeing traffic congestion. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Anything else that you see in a transportation system that you think, boy, I wish we had a solution for that? So let's see what I wrote down. So all those are great answers. So certainly congestion, right, on this first slide, comes in many forms. So this one, if you've ever been to Tokyo, they have one of the most efficient subway systems in the world. We talk about demand and supply. They have a huge demand for their subway system, to the point where when it's congested, it's congested. And I have been on this train. I have seen the employees of the subway pushing people onto the train. It is that busy every day. So if you're looking at capacity, how many people can you put in a train? You can actually put in a lot. Now, if you thought New York, if you've ever been in New York and taken their subways and thought it was congested, this is sort of a slightly a magnitude greater than that. We talked about safety, right? Incidents and crashes. If you pay attention to these things, and almost without exception, I can guarantee you almost everyone on this call, on this talk, has been impacted by crashes, right? To someone being seriously hurt or killed that they know. We have on the US approximately 35,000 fatalities a year on our roadways. Just a very large amount. So what's a transportation problem? Another one, security. So increased freight, security concerns. This is trucks trying to get into the United States, going through security checkpoints. So everything's increasing. If you increase, the increased freight is going to increase by about 40% by 2040. 48% of that is hazardous goods. We have all kinds of nasty stuff on our roads and our railways that impact us negatively. This is a map of the United States showing the freight movements in 2002, and this is what it's going to be predicted to in 15 years from now. And you can pretty much see where you live. You know how much truck traffic you have on your roads now, and it's going to be increasing by about 40%. So how as a transportation professional are you going to handle this great increase? And these are not small details. This is like Lac-Mégantic in Quebec, Canada. This is a rail catastrophe from a few years back. Basically, an oil train got out of control, ran into town, burnt the town down. About 50 people died from this crash of this oil tankers. This is not a small problem. In the U.S., this was all North Dakota crude. So from the Bakken oil fields, these number of these vehicles have gone up from 10,000 carloads in 2009 to about 500,000 of these types of trains a day, a year. And they're coming through in our area. They're coming through all the way from North Dakota down to the refineries in Oklahoma and Texas. So it is a big problem. Another transportation problem someone mentioned bridges. We have aging infrastructure. We built the interstate system about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when most of it was built. So we have to rebuild it, and that's sort of where that infrastructure bill was indicating. For those of you from Houston, you might recognize this. This is the Gulf Freeway at its original build. It doesn't look that way now, but that's the original design of it. And another problem we have with not only aging infrastructure is aging population. This is going to impact you not only on transportation, but also your own lives. This is a graph of, on this side is age, and on the x-axis from 0 to 30 is the number of people in each age group, from 0 to 4, 5 to 9. What I'm talking about is the senior citizens, anyone over 65. In 1970, there were 20 million people in the United States over 65, 10% of the population. By 10 years ago, it was 41 million people over 65, 13% of the population. By 2050, so 30 years from now, you're going to have 90 million people, 21% of the population. So this is going to impact everything, right? Having this large cohort of older U.S. citizens, right? It affects how they travel. How are we going to get them to their places? How can they stay in their house and still get around? How can they get to their appointments? How can they be successful? Where it affects you personally, right? In 1970, you may have heard that the Social Security system may be in trouble. And the Social Security system is a pay-as-you-go. The people below this who are working pay the Social Security for the people above them. So in 1970, had lots of people paying for a much smaller population. By 2010, more people, less people working, less percentage people working. By the time 30 years from now, when many of the scholars on this call will be approaching retirement, there'll be much less people working percentage-wise as the people need Social Security. So when they talk about Social Security being in trouble, this is why. The number of people collecting Social Security as a percentage of the number of people working is going to be pretty small. And to date, I don't think anyone's really solved this problem. So when you hear, oh, when you retire, there might not be Social Security, this is what they're talking about. And obviously it affects everything in our profession, and transportation in particular. You heard Dr. Hampshire on last week talk about equity, environmental justice in his talk. That's also an issue. This is a picture of Detroit. This is the Chrysler Freeway, where the issue came in, and this has happened in almost any U.S. city. We drive on these interstate highways in our cities, in Houston and Chicago. Those roads weren't there when the city was built. They moved people away to build the roads, and this is an example of it, and they split neighborhoods. And they tended to split the poorest neighborhoods in each city, because that's, for whatever, it was probably the easiest politically at the time to do that. It was wrong, but that's what happened. And now they're working busily to try and fix these issues that they had been created 50, 60 years ago in the creation of the system. And Dr. Hampshire did an excellent job of outlining some of that, some of those issues. We're also worried about sustainability and resiliency and robustness. For those of you in Houston, you might recognize this as US 59, a very busy road. For those of you in Houston, you might recognize this as US 59 on a really bad day. They often get a lot of flooding and hurricane type things. This is actually not a failure. This is by design. The roadways are designed for when it's flooding out, for these roads are designed to flood. So we don't like it when they flood, but they're actually designed to handle this water. It's not a complete catastrophe. When it gets into the residential areas, when this water gets into the residential areas, that's when it's a real problem. Not so much when it floods the transportation system. So getting people in, getting first responders into an extreme event like a hurricane, and getting people out is also a transportation problem. Potential solutions, you've heard some of it. It's like build more capacity, right? The issues with that, well, we don't have land. We can't go around like we used to 60 years ago, just taking land from people, tearing down their houses and building roads. It's just very difficult to do, and it's almost impossible. So what we have to do is use new techniques, more intelligent use of the available resources, which comes into these intelligent transportation systems. You have an incident on a freeway, you get that information, you send it to a traffic management center, you dispatch, first responders, you give out information on variable message signs, the internet, in the vehicle, and you operate that in a way that you're much more efficient. So that's sort of the future of transportation, are these intelligent transportation systems. I love this picture because I used it 20 years ago. You can look at the technology and go, oh, that's a really old technology. Yeah, and of course it is, because it's 20 years old. Everything's better now. We have much better technology. We're much more sophisticated things, but the essence of it is the same. And you've probably seen this, where the vehicles, the autonomous vehicles and the connected vehicles talk with each other. So not only can they help the driver, but they can communicate with each other and make each other safer. So we talked about too much congestion, too much or not enough safety. These connected and automated vehicles are designed to do both of those things, get more vehicles down a roadway and do it safer. Truck platooning is one example where the vehicles follow each other much closer. You can get higher capacity and it can be safer. I was going to show you some of our research, but since my videos aren't showing, I'll skip that. But we do a lot of work here on these types of automated vehicle research. So concluding remarks, transportation careers, they solve very complex and important problems. What I wanted to get across is, as Dr. Perkins indicated, that it's also very multidisciplinary. There are many options. There's engineering, but there's planning, there's law, there's medicine. We do a lot of work with our medical centers in Kansas and Nebraska in our center, and as part of our research. So I don't want to get the opinion it's just, well, it's engineering. It's much more complex than that. And the problems we're facing are much more complex, which is why we need a multidisciplinary approach. I did want to acknowledge the people that have sponsored the Scholars Program. It's run through our Mid-America Transportation Center, and we're the Region 7 UTC, but the funding comes from the US DOT University Transportation Center program, and we're very appreciative of that. So with that, Judy, I'm going to stop. I'll be happy to take any questions on careers from the students if they have any.
Okay, let me say two more things about Dr. Rilett. First, thanks a lot for your presentation. Very informative, and hopefully it opened the eyes for those who are participating to see just how vast the transportation community is, because it includes all of the other, so many other areas along with it in terms of relationship. To amplify the work that Dr. Rilett has done, he has received 2 awards. He was awarded the 2019 Arthur W. Willington Prize for Best Transportation-Related Paper in an ASCE journal. That's for American Society for Civil Engineers. And he is the recipient of the 2021 Frank M. Masters Transportation Engineering Award because of his contributions to innovative research on transportation systems and collaborative leadership to develop a diverse workforce in transportation engineering. So let's show our appreciation not only for his accomplishment, but also for the presentation.